almost everyday vanilla flavor contains no vanilla bean. The story starts with a prized Mesoamerican orchid that could grow elsewhere in the world, but stubbornly refused to produce fruit. Vanilla is almost impossible to avoid. It appears in ice cream, cakes, chocolate, soft drinks, packaged sweets, perfumes, candles, and products that are merely supposed to smell clean. The word has even become shorthand for the ordinary, the safe choice, the flavor without surprises. The vanilla plant is anything but ordinary. A vanilla pod starts as a pale orchid flower that opens only briefly. When successfully pollinated, that flower can produce a long green fruit. The fruit takes months to mature, and even then it smells little like the vanilla we know. Its aroma develops through an elaborate curing process. Every stage demands time, judgment, and labor. Mass-market vanilla flavor, meanwhile, is cheap, consistent, and everywhere. Two separate breakthroughs made that possible. First, people learned to produce the orchid's fruit by hand. Then, chemists learned to reproduce its most recognizable aromatic molecule without using the orchid at all. To understand how the flavor became detached from the plant, we need to return to the tropical forests of Mesoamerica, where vanilla belonged to a climbing vine, a difficult flower, and one very particular ecology. The main botanical source of commercial vanilla is Vanilla planifolia, an orchid native to tropical Mesoamerica. It looks nothing like the small potted orchids commonly sold as houseplants. Its thick green vine climbs trees and other supports, holding on with aerial roots. Under the right conditions, a mature vine produces clusters of pale yellow-green flowers. Each flower contains both the structures that produce pollen and the surface that receives it. Convenient, you might think. It is not. Orchid pollen often comes in compact masses rather than loose grains drifting freely through the air. In vanilla, a small membrane called the rostellum separates the pollen from the receptive stigma. The rostellum is a physical barrier. It keeps the flower from casually fertilizing itself. An animal visiting the blossom has to interact with it in precisely the right way, moving pollen past that barrier. Researchers have debated which wild pollinators matter most, and the familiar claim that one particular kind of bee did the job exclusively is too neat. What is clear is that natural pollination was uncommon and relied on ecological relationships that did not travel with a plant cutting. That difference shaped everything that followed. The vine could reproduce without seeds. Growers could take a cutting from one plant, transport it, root it, and raise another. Colonial botanists eventually grew healthy vanilla vines far beyond the Americas. Growing the vine solved only half the problem. A vanilla flower usually stays open for roughly a day. If pollination misses that window, the flower withers and falls. No pollination means no fruit, no cured pod, and no vanilla spice. European collectors could carry the plant across oceans and display it in tropical gardens. They could watch it climb and see it flower. Then they could wait for a harvest that never came. The vines traveled, the flowers opened, the pods did not appear. Long before outsiders confronted that biological barrier, Mesoamerican communities had learned to cultivate, gather, cure, trade, and value vanilla. Its history is closely tied to the humid lowlands of eastern Mexico, including the area around modern Veracruz, and communities later celebrated for Totonac vanilla production. Naming a single first cultivator is difficult. Later accounts often squeeze complicated regional histories into one people, one ruler, or one dramatic discovery. Mesoamerican use is firmly established. Claims of uncontested priority are not. Nahuatl sources call vanilla tliltzochitl, commonly interpreted as black flower. The name sounds odd because the orchid flower is pale. The black object was the cured fruit, darkened during processing until it looked nothing like the green pod growing on the vine. The flower produced the fruit, but the fruit gave vanilla its identity. Vanilla was one of the aromatic ingredients used in cacao preparations. These were not modern candy bar flavors mixed with milk and sugar. Cacao drinks could be bitter, spiced, and foamed, and they were tied to elite consumption, tribute, ceremony, and exchange. Recipes differed, and vanilla was one prized option within a much broader Mesoamerican language of fragrance and taste. Early colonial works preserve pieces of that world. The Florentine Codex, compiled in the 16th century under the direction of the Franciscan Bernardino de Sahagún with extensive knowledge supplied by Nahua scholars, describes plants, markets, foods, and cacao preparations. The physician Francisco Hernández also recorded information about the plants of New Spain. These sources emerged from colonial encounters and have to be read in that context. Even so, they make one point unmistakable. Vanilla was neither a European discovery, nor an empty ingredient waiting for Europe to give it meaning. Preparing it also required knowledge that became easy to miss once finished pods entered commercial trade. Freshly harvested vanilla fruit is green and fairly subdued. Its familiar aroma appears only after curing. Methods have differed across places and periods, but the basic process stops the pod's normal living activity, encourages controlled warmth and moisture, dries it gradually, and then conditions it over time. Inside the pod, enzymes work on aroma-related compounds stored in less fragrant forms. Vanillin becomes more available, while many other molecules add woody, floral, smoky, fruity, and balsamic notes. There is no single magical instant when vanilla appears. The smell comes from the careful transformation of biological material. A badly cured pod may mold, dry too quickly, or lose quality. A well-cured pod becomes dark, supple, intensely aromatic, and durable enough to trade. Patient work turns an unimpressive green fruit into something concentrated and portable. This was vanilla's first great transformation. The orchid produced the pod. Human knowledge produced the spice. Later legends surrounded that history with rulers, forbidden love, sacrifice, and orchids rising from blood. Those traditions may carry cultural meaning, but they are not contemporary records of vanilla's earliest cultivation. The documented story needs no help from legend. Generations of Mesoamerican growers developed a valuable aromatic product from a fruit that required favorable ecology, well-timed harvesting, and patient curing. Vanilla's association with cacao eventually carried it across the Atlantic. After the Spanish invasion and colonization of the Americas, cacao, vanilla, and other ingredients entered European networks of trade, medicine, courtly consumption, and confectionery. The recipes changed on the journey. Sugar became more important. European consumers reshaped unfamiliar preparations around familiar expectations. Popular versions often give the transfer to one famous man. Hernán Cortés is frequently credited with personally introducing vanilla to Europe after tasting it in a ruler's chocolate drink. Vanilla and cacao certainly moved through the Spanish colonial world. The tidy scene in which one conqueror discovers the flavor and delivers it to Europe owes much more to later storytelling. The real transfer was broader and considerably less cinematic. It involved indigenous producers, colonial intermediaries, merchants, officials, religious institutions, physicians, cooks, and ships. Vanilla crossed the Atlantic through an imperial system that extracted and transported American goods, not because one man carried a revelation home in his pocket. European vanilla was initially bound to chocolate. Over time, cooks, confectioners, pharmacists, and perfumers began using it elsewhere. By the 17th and 18th centuries, vanilla appeared in European recipes and luxury goods as a flavor in its own right. A surviving recipe in Thomas Jefferson's hand shows how far the taste had traveled by the late 18th century. His formula for vanilla ice cream, recorded after his time in France, combined egg yolks, sugar, cream, and vanilla. This was elite consumption, not an ordinary American dessert. Ice had to be harvested or stored, the ingredients cost money, and the vanilla still depended on supplies from its American growing region. Europe had acquired a taste for vanilla. It still could not reproduce it. That dependence frustrated colonial botanists and plantation interests. If vanilla could grow in other tropical territories, production might expand and be redirected through European empires. Cuttings went to gardens and colonies warm enough to support the vine. Plants survived in places such as Java and islands of the Indian Ocean. Some grew vigorously. Then they flowered and produced no fruit. Climate was no longer the only obstacle. Anatomy was. The vital interaction between flower and pollinator had stayed behind. Vanilla's identity had crossed the ocean, but its complete reproductive relationship had not. Europe could copy the taste. Colonial gardens could copy the plant. Neither could copy the pod. By the early 19th century, botanists had begun examining the flower more closely. In the 1830s, Belgian botanist Charles Moren demonstrated artificial pollination in vanilla. His experiments proved something essential. A person could intervene in the flower and cause fertilization. A scientific demonstration, though, is not automatically a plantation method. Commercial cultivation needed a technique that was fast, reliable, teachable and gentle enough to repeat across large numbers of flowers during their short opening period. The practical answer appeared in 1841 on Bourbon Island, now Réunion, east of Madagascar. Edmond Albius was 12 years old and enslaved. He worked with plants on the estate of Féréol-Bellier-Beaumont. Albius discovered a simple way to pollinate the vanilla flower by hand. With a slender object, the pollinator lifted or moved the rostellum aside, then pressed the pollen-bearing structure against the receptive stigma. The movement was tiny. The consequences were not. Move the barrier, press the reproductive surfaces together, continue to the next flower. Each flower required one operation by hand. Each successful operation might produce one pod. Albius did not invent artificial pollination from nothing. Moren's earlier work remains important. What Albius devised was the quick, practical technique that workers could use throughout a plantation. He turned the botanical possibility into a repeatable agricultural process. A later dispute attempted to reduce his achievement. The botanist Jean-Michel Claude-Richard claimed that Albius had learned the method from instructions given years before. Bellier-Beaumont publicly defended Albius and pointed to the timing and circumstances of the discovery. Historians credit Albius with the practical method that transformed vanilla production. The dispute says a great deal. Colonial societies readily profited from specialized knowledge while resisting full recognition of the enslaved people who created it. Albius's method helped establish a valuable international industry, but emancipation brought him neither wealth nor lasting security. He died in poverty in 1880. His life does not make a comforting story about brilliance inevitably receiving its reward. It did not, and every development that followed cannot be credited to him alone. Botanical research mattered. So did plantation networks, cultivation, curing knowledge, transport, and market demand. Still, the dividing line is clear. Before the practical method, vanilla plants outside their original ecology could flower and fail. Afterward, workers could deliberately make them produce fruit. Albius had not made vanilla easy. He had made production possible wherever plantations could organize enough careful hands. And that distinction matters. Hand-pollination removed the crop's dependence on local pollinators, but it replaced ecological specialization with human labor. A worker cannot pollinate an entire vanilla field with one sweep of a machine. During flowering season, workers inspect the vines and find blossoms that have opened. Every usable flower must be handled separately, within its brief receptive period. The act takes seconds. Multiply those seconds by thousands of flowers, and they become days of concentrated labor. Successful pollination starts another long wait. The green fruits spend months on the vine before they are ready for harvest. Workers then sort and cure them through repeated stages of warming, sweating, drying, and conditioning. The details differ, and skill makes a difference. Too much moisture invites mold. Too little can halt aroma development or leave the pods brittle. Rising demand cannot make the biological calendar run faster. The method spread across Réunion and the western Indian Ocean. Madagascar, the Comoros, and other tropical regions became major producers. Colonial officials and plantation owners now had the necessary pieces: vines propagated from cuttings, flowers fertilized by workers, and a European market already taught to prize the flavor. Exports increased. Vanilla acquired a new geography. The name Bourbon vanilla came to mean Vanilla planifolia, connected with the old Bourbon Island network and the Indian Ocean growing tradition. It has nothing to do with pouring American whiskey over an orchid, although the term has probably inspired a few hopeful misunderstandings on dessert menus. Behind the graceful trade name stood a colonial labor system. Vanilla expanded along French imperial routes through plantation ownership, control of land, and workers whose knowledge and effort often received poor compensation. Madagascar later became the best-known center of natural vanilla production, but the value of the commodity did not guarantee stable earnings for the people who grew and cured it. Natural vanilla remained vulnerable as well. Storms, drought, disease, and badly timed labor could damage flowering and fruit development. Cured pods were valuable and easy to carry, so theft became a recurring danger in some producing regions. Farmers sometimes harvested early to avoid losing the crop, though immature pods could yield an inferior aroma. High prices encouraged more planting. Collapsing prices punished that same expansion. That is the uneasy arithmetic of a crop that is agricultural and almost artisanal at once. Every pod follows a biological calendar. Every flower comes with a deadline. Every cured bean has passed through human hands again and again. During the 19th century, demand for vanilla spread beyond elite kitchens. Industrial confectionery expanded. Commercial ice cream developed. Chocolate production grew. Perfumes, medicines, beverages, and packaged baked goods all needed recognizable flavors in larger, steadier quantities. Hand-pollination increased the natural supply, but it could never make beans as cheap or uniform as mass manufacturing demanded. The orchid was no longer confined to one regional ecology. It was still bound to seasons, storms, curing, and labor. Industry began searching for the flavor within the flavor. Cured vanilla holds a complicated mixture of aromatic compounds, but one molecule provides much of the smell people recognize at once: vanillin. Vanillin is not the complete aroma of a bean. It is the strongest central note. Natural vanilla contains many other compounds that soften and deepen that note, creating differences among species, growing regions, maturity levels, and curing methods. Compare pure vanillin with a complex extract, and it is a little like hearing a melody played as one bold line instead of by a full ensemble. You know the tune. The texture around it has changed. 19th-century chemists tried to isolate and understand that dominant molecule. In 1874, Ferdinand Tiemann and Wilhelm Harman reported a method for synthesizing vanillin from coniferin, a substance associated with coniferous plants. Their work proved that vanilla's defining aromatic signal could be built without growing, pollinating, harvesting, or curing a vanilla orchid first. Harman later helped establish the commercial production of vanillin. Chemistry had moved beyond analysis and into manufacture. That early technique was not the last. Producers later made vanillin from eugenol, a compound associated with clove oil, and from lignin-related byproducts of the wood pulp industry. Modern conventional production commonly uses petrochemical starting materials such as guaiacol, while some newer methods rely on fermentation and other biological routes. The feedstocks and labels vary. The basic achievement does not. Manufacturers can produce vanillin without extracting it from a vanilla bean. For the nose, molecular structure matters more than biography. A vanillin molecule carries no tiny recollection of an orchid, a clove-related feedstock, wood processing, fermentation, or a chemical factory. When the structure is the same, it creates the same central aromatic signal. The surrounding context still affects what we perceive. Pure vanillin cannot completely copy cured vanilla because a bean contains a much broader chemical mixture. But in a cookie, inexpensive ice cream, candy coating, beverage, fragrance, or packaged cake, that dominant signal can announce vanilla almost immediately. This answered the problem hand-pollination could not. Synthetic vanillin was stable, available in enormous quantities, and consistent in quality. It did not wait for a flowering season or require months of curing. Prices dropped, supplies grew. Vanilla flavor broke free from the vanilla crop. The outcome was a cultural reversal. A prized regional aromatic became one of industrial life's default tastes. Vanilla could enter foods too inexpensive to support genuine bean extract. It could soften harsh notes in chocolate, strengthen the impression of sweetness in baked goods, scent household products, and sit quietly in the background of thousands of formulas. Somewhere along the way, vanilla also became another word for dullness. That may be the oddest linguistic result of the whole story. Chemistry achieved something botanically extraordinary, only for the result to become our standard metaphor for making the least adventurous choice possible. The title claim requires some precision because the market uses vanilla to describe several different things. A whole vanilla bean is the orchid's cured fruit. Vanilla extract draws flavor compounds from vanilla beans into a liquid under defined production standards. In the United States, federal standards govern the ingredients and composition of products sold as vanilla extract. Pure vanilla extract is not synthetic vanillin disguised by a more expensive label. Other vanilla flavors are put together differently. Some combine real vanilla with additional flavoring substances. Some depend on vanillin produced from non-vanilla botanical or biological sources. Others use conventionally synthesized vanillin. Natural flavor and artificial flavor are legal categories whose meanings depend on source, production method, intended flavor, and jurisdiction. They are not a universal scale running from morally good to morally bad. The term natural vanillin creates particular confusion. It does not always mean vanillin extracted from a vanilla bean. In some regulatory systems, vanillin produced from an eligible natural source using an accepted process can qualify for natural flavor labeling, even when no vanilla orchid took part. The strongest safe conclusion is also the most revealing. Much of the vanilla flavor in inexpensive mass-produced food does not come from vanilla beans. It usually comes from vanillin made through other materials and processes. Genuine vanilla products remain important and carefully regulated. But the everyday taste became universal because industry no longer needed the plant to produce its central note. The story is more complicated than real vanilla fighting fake vanilla. Synthetic vanillin was not merely a way to deceive consumers. It answered a genuine supply problem. Natural vanilla costs so much because it requires tropical cultivation, flower-by-flower pollination in most commercial settings, a long fruiting period, careful harvesting, and extended curing. Production also faces weather, crop disease, theft, volatile prices, and the economics of a concentrated supply chain. If every vanilla-flavored cookie, drink, candle, candy, and carton of inexpensive ice cream needed the full aromatic output of cured beans, supply would struggle to meet demand, and ordinary products would cost more. Reproduced vanillin made the familiar note abundant without reproducing every quality of the spice. Calling the two products identical, however, would erase real differences. A cured bean is not merely a container of vanillin. It carries an aromatic system shaped by genetics, soil, climate, harvest maturity, and curing. Extracts retain parts of that complexity. Different vanilla species and growing origins can have noticeably different profiles. Vanillin provides the recognizable center. The bean builds everything around it. Nor is there a clean moral boundary between an innocent plant and a guilty laboratory. Natural vanilla can support growers, skilled curing work, regional identity, and agricultural livelihoods. It can also operate within unstable markets where farmers bear major risks while value collects elsewhere in the supply chain. Synthetic production eases pressure on bean supplies and reduces costs, but it may rely on industrial feedstocks and manufacturing systems with consequences of their own. Fermentation-derived methods add further categories rather than settling the argument for good. The useful distinction is between a botanical spice and a reproduced aromatic signal. One retains much of the complexity produced by the plant and the curing process. The other takes the most recognizable element and makes it reliable on an industrial scale. These are not rival histories. They are two successive answers to the same stubborn constraint. The first constraint was geography. Vanilla's pollination biology tied reliable pod production to its native ecology. Mesoamerican growers cultivated the vine, harvested its fruit, and developed the knowledge that transformed green pods into a dark, aromatic spice. Their cacao traditions gave vanilla cultural value before Europe even had a word for it. Colonial trade moved the flavor across the Atlantic. European courts and kitchens adopted it. Tropical gardens reproduced the vine. Yet those copied plants could not reliably reproduce the fruit.
Charles Moran showed that pollination by hand could succeed.
Edmond Albius developed the quick physical technique that made it practical. By shifting a tiny barrier inside a short-lived flower, workers could produce vanilla pods far beyond Mesoamerica. Production spread through the Indian Ocean. Reunion, Madagascar, the Comoros, and other regions established new vanilla traditions. Growers pollinated flowers, workers tended pods. Curing specialists brought out the aroma. Merchants moved it into a growing market for confectionery, perfumery, and packaged food. That success produced a second constraint. Carefully cured, hand-pollinated beans could circle the planet, but they could not cheaply flavor everything the industrial world wanted to label vanilla. Chemists separated the dominant signal from its botanical container. They isolated vanillin, synthesized it, and gave manufacturers a way to produce it from materials that had never belonged to a vanilla orchid. Vanilla became universal through two different acts of reproduction. Human hands reproduced the pod beyond its original pollinating environment. Industrial chemistry reproduced the pod's defining aroma without reproducing the plant. Vanilla now describes two related but profoundly different things. One is a tropical agricultural product whose flowers are handled individually. The other is an abstract flavor profile manufactured wherever factories, feedstocks, and chemistry make it possible. Mesoamerican communities cultivated it. Colonial networks displaced it and widened its reach. Albius's method opened its flowers. Indian Ocean workers scaled production. Chemists isolated its signature. Manufacturers cut that signature loose from geography. The orchid never disappeared. It became the standard against which every other form of vanilla was understood. Return for a moment to the flower. Pale, waxy, open only briefly. Inside is the rostellum, the small membrane that once helped confine commercial vanilla production to a narrow relationship among plant, pollinator, and place. On a modern farm, a worker shifts that barrier by hand. If the timing is right, a green pod starts growing. Months later, workers harvest it. More months of curing turn it into the dark, fragrant bean sold as one of the world's most labor-intensive spices. Set beside it a spoonful of inexpensive vanilla-flavored ice cream, a packaged cake, or the familiar scent of a household product. That aroma may contain vanillin without containing any material that ever passed through a vanilla flower. No pod, no curing rack, perhaps no orchid anywhere in its production. Still, the flavor depends on the orchid in another way. The plant created the aromatic pattern that people learned to recognize, prize, and eventually reproduce. Synthetic vanillin could become vanilla only because centuries of cultivation, trade, cooking, and memory had already established what vanilla meant. The everyday version became universal by subtraction. Industry kept the clearest aromatic signal while removing the flower, growing region, seasons, and much of the labor. What remained was cheap enough to appear almost everywhere. Vanilla, then, is not plain. It is one flavor divided in two. On one side stands a difficult orchid, pollinated one flower at a time and transformed through months of skilled labor. On the other is a molecule reproduced on an industrial scale, carrying the orchid's most recognizable quality into foods and fragrances that could never rely on beans alone. When you encounter vanilla today, you may be tasting the plant's cured fruit. Or you may be tasting its central molecule made from something entirely different. Most often, the label and product category reveal which history you are holding. Both histories return to the same brief flower and the same biological barrier. A child's practical hand movement overcame the first, chemistry overcame the next. Together, they turned the prized Mesoamerican orchid into the world's default flavor, often without a trace of vanilla bean. If this changed the way you see vanilla, subscribe to the hidden course and share the turning point that surprised you most: hand-pollinating the orchid, curing its pods for months, or the moment chemistry learned to make vanilla without vanilla.